discussion. Go ahead and keep eating. If you want to get more, there's more back there. There's obviously a lot of dessert left for those who want to indulge in some cake there. And if you have questions for the panelists, we have the note cards. If you have note cards, you can bring them up or give them to Emily or Mike to bring up. We'll take questions for our panelists, for all of us to discuss, and I might answer some myself, but I have plenty of questions for these guys here this lunch. Basically, the reason why we're here today and having especially this lunch discussion, and even the reason the Commonwealth Foundation and Mercatus Center, what we do, it really goes beyond just the elections. And I know this is a lot of people say this is a big year election. We're going to change the course of America. We're going to change the course of Pennsylvania. This is the most important election of our lifetime, which is true until the next election in another 2 years. And the reason why we have tried to bring together this forum today is because the reason election results sometimes come out the way they do is because a lot of people think the ideas that certain ideas sound good, that it sounds like a good idea to tax the rich. We'll be better off if we just tax the top 2% and get those guys. Or they think that's, if we just spent more money, we'd stimulate the economy. That's the path to prosperity. Or the idea that, federal money is free money. We can just spend, we're going to get this federal money. Let's get this down. And you heard that today. What we're trying to provide is a tool of how do you go and talk to people, to voters, or your colleagues, your neighbors, to your lawmakers. For those of you who are lawmakers over here, how do you talk to your colleagues? And give you guys the tools to take out there to talk about why economic freedom is important to prosperity. What is the message we need to convey? How do we convey those message? And so this is kind of the tools to persuade people that we need to get back to our constitutional roots, to limited government and to freedom. So I'll open it now with just a kind of a broad discussion for everyone to answer. What is the message you would take to, if you were asked to advise a candidate, or talking to voters, or to citizen groups, or to lawmakers? What is the message you take? What's the most important thing they should focus on in the upcoming election, and why economic freedom is better than government control, or what is our path to prosperity? So I'll let you guys jump in, whoever wants to take it first.
Well, I think one of the things I'd emphasize, and this may be just because this has been my focus recently, but is everything that government does, it has a potential to affect people differently. So there isn't just a matter of whether people have economic freedom or whether people are burdened by the actions of government, but it's also inequitable burdens and inequitable freedom. So Don brought up the founding fathers, and one of the things I always like to keep in mind is think about the Boston Tea Party, the first Tea Party movement, right? How many people say that was about, what were they protesting? Did the Tea Act raise taxes or lower taxes? How many people say that it raised taxes? How many people say that the Tea Act lowered taxes? Good. Well, this is a very informed audience. I think most people don't think about that. The Tea Act actually cut taxes. Why would Americans get upset about that? It's because it cut taxes for one and only one company, the government-sponsored enterprise of the era, the big GSE. It wasn't Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, it was the East India Tea Company. It's British government chartered company, and the Tea Act said you no longer have to pay the tax on tea. Now, there had been previous tax revolts, the Townsend Acts and the Stamp Act and all those, and people had been upset about those. But it was the Tea Act that really incited this huge pushback. And it was because a lot of what government does, it doesn't just burden us, but it inequitably burdens us. And it benefits particular special interests. And so one of the reasons why I like to hit on this is because I think change happens when you get people who aren't necessarily likely to agree with you ideologically to kind of recognize your points. And this is a really good bridge point with our friends on the left and progressives, is that a lot of government activity benefits particular special interests and entrenched interests and wealthy and well-connected. And I think we can enhance economic freedom at the same time that we diminish the political power of the wealthy and well-connected. So what I'm talking about are government regulations that benefit particular interest groups or particular firms or particular ways of doing business. Talking about subsidies, for example, farm subsidies by and large go to very wealthy agribusiness. I'm talking about tax provisions in the state and the federal tax code that benefit some firms over others. If you happen to be a film production company and you're operating in Virginia, guess what? You don't have to pay a state sales tax. If you buy donuts for your crew in the morning, you don't have to pay a sales tax on that. You get a break on your personal and your corporate income tax. Well, I don't get that benefit. Most people in Virginia don't, but film production companies do because they have the right political pull. So one of the things I emphasize is the power of government and economic freedom, but also how that power can differentially affect citizens. And I think that's a good bridging point to sort of non-traditional allies.
I guess the thing I'd like to talk about is kind of the opposite in a sense. I think to a large degree, an awful lot of economic policy, I would liken to maybe bloodletting or something, because I don't think people realize just how hard it is to really change the economy. The economy is really driven by the private sector. The economy hires people. It's very hard, certainly in the short run, to really move the economy. I think this recession's been a really humbling, or should be a really humbling experience for economic policy. I mean, we absolutely pulled out all the stops, spent a ton of stimulus money, spent a lot of money, and gave up a lot to try to turn this thing around. It didn't happen because the economy wasn't ready to be turned around. And you know, government does not create jobs. It's kind of that simple. It has a very limited ability to create jobs. I think government can mess things up at times, as I've said before, but for the most part, the private sector is really what's making things work and making things work right. And again, you know, I just don't think. I think if you're going to conduct economic policy, you need to look at what really works and really look at not just causation. You know, correlation is causation, not just sort of think, well, we've got to do something and do something. I think sometimes the best advice is don't just do something, stand there with economic policy, to be honest. It's a horrible thing to say for the government, perhaps, but I do think that's good advice sometimes.
I like to talk about redefining the core responsibilities or duties of government, and I like to examine that not just in my research, but I also like to raise those questions when I teach and when I talk to people. I like to ask them, you know, what is the proper role of government in society? You know, how far do we give, how much freedom do we give the government to interfere with our own individual decisions? How much freedom do we give the government to make decisions for us? And I often want to ask the question, you know, who's it about? Who's the government about? Empowering bureaucrats, or is it empowering individuals? And I often see the government's role as to make sure that we empower individuals to make decisions, not bureaucrats. And when it comes to specific policies, especially at the state level, I often question government involvement in the provision of education. I often question government role in the provision of some public services at the state and local level. And I often wonder how much of that activity can be done privately by individual private companies as opposed to state bureaucracies. And I think that goes well in line with questioning you know, the government involvement and saying, you know, are we empowering bureaucrats with the desire for equity and so on, or are we empowering individuals? And I think one of the better ways to convince others that that we need to examine the role of government in some of its traditional roles is to ask people on both the left and the right is, you know, who do we want to empower here? Do we want to empower individual choice, or do we want to give it up to the politicians to mess things up, you know, frankly, most of the time? And so specifically, I'd like to talk about, and you all to take back to your constituencies and talk about the choice in terms of schooling. Do you want to go with the choice system or the lack of choice as we currently have to a large extent, I think? Do you want to maybe not privatize, but hopefully maybe even privatize schools? But if privatization is not possible, let's enable more choice in the school system. Maybe we can look at educational vouchers as a solution to the current rather, I think, inflexible school system that we have. And to a large extent, many of the problems we deal with, I think, is the lack of education, is the lack of economic education of the general public. And no wonder they're so bad at economics, because our schools don't teach them that. And our schools don't teach them that because they're state schools. What do you expect? And so schooling is very important, but I think we also need to look at some of the local services and goods that the government provides, and question those. Does the trash have to be provided by a government? Trash collection have to be provided by a government-run firm, or can be privatized, for example? Something else. I don't know. Something else that we need to examine and see how much of what the government currently does can be done better through the private sector. And again, somebody on the left might oppose that for equity reasons, but again, raise the question, who are you empowering here? Is the government really equitable? As Matt said, I think the government is often inequitable in its decision-making and benefits all kinds of entrenched interests, and I think that is understood by a wide political spectrum. People on the left and right understand that government is often corrupt and not very fair or equal in its decisions. And I think that's the biggest message we need to carry to the people, to kind of unite both the left and the right instead of dividing us on those issues.
And then to follow up with that, the reason I'm on the panel is not because of the 5 economics classes that I've taken. Shockingly, there are more economic insights you can get from this side of the table, but I want to offer the perspective of how can we use this knowledge as engaged citizens, as activists, and how can you convey the most important message to your friends and neighbors, to your fellow legislators, and what's the best way to do that? And politics is personal. These are issues that affect our lives every day, but we need to convey them that way. Tell your story when you're talking about politics. Talk about how government overreach has affected your business, or your bottom line in your family, or about how you guys budget. We have been talking a lot at Commonwealth Foundation recently about Medicaid and privatization and pensions, and as we talk about it, what should be important to everyone about this? What is their takeaway? Well, ultimately, this is about saving the American way of life. This is about the American dream. This is about how things are supposed to work. And so when you're talking to your friends and neighbors, wherever they fall on the political spectrum, that's a commonality that we share, and that's a great point to start your story and to start getting into the economics and the unemployment and the situation that we're in, to bridge that to a personal connection.
A question we got submitted: well, is there a body of work or research looking at the efficiency of government spending? Meaning, is there some government spending that's better than others? Are there some programs more effective than others? Certain categories of spending that are more efficient, I assume, economically, but also in terms of how the money is spent. And what is the typical level of quote-unquote waste? I think that could be both economic waste and actual waste, money just not getting to where it was intended. So if anyone can answer that or wants to build it.
I'll take a first stab. So one thing, by the way, is that when economists use the word efficiency, it's actually different than when normal people use the word efficiency. So normal people think about efficiency as like, well, do you waste things they sort of think about it in an engineering sense. You spend $5, and does anything get wasted where you could have spent it, you could have made the widget for $3 rather than $5. When economists think about efficiency, it's actually a much bigger and grandiose point. When economists talk about maximizing efficiency, they're talking about maximizing wealth and wealth creation and the total potential for gains from exchange. And when you fail to maximize efficiency, you're failing to maximize happiness, really. So keeping those two in mind, there's two ways to answer that question. If you answer it like an economist, and Pavel, I think, did an excellent job of this, is there's a pretty good economic case to be made for having government provide some things that the private sector, for reasons of incentive, don't provide. National defense is a typical example. It's really, really difficult to get a private company to want to provide national defense, because if you provide me an intercontinental ballistic missile shield, you also provide it to Dawn. And you provide it to everybody. And so therefore it's very difficult to get me to charge me for it. And so this is called a public good. And so there's a long, long history of economists saying, yeah, government should provide a few public goods. And these are things like national defense, the rule of law, they are protection of property rights. Those things are very valuable. So that's sort of maximizes efficiency in the economic sense. And then there have been various looks at, does government actually carry out some activities more efficiently than others? And that's a little bit more of a normal person's definition of efficiency. Are some agencies better at managing their funds than others? I don't know if Keith spent some time in government. Maybe you could give some insight of what some agencies that work better than others. But you do see across agencies and across states and across governments, sometimes they're much more effective at that than others. In my own view, it's going to be much more prudent in their use of resources when they're subject to competition. So that's why privatization or working to get some kind of competitive process for bidding out roads and things like that can be much more prudent use of resources in that second normal person sense of efficiency.
I guess I'll add more to Matt's point about efficiency and competition. I think that's one of the crucial aspects in ensuring government competitiveness is forcing governments at the state and local level to be more competitive. And I think that's why fiscal federalism, as we know here in the United States, is such a great system, I think, compared to maybe some other European countries that are more centralized. And I think for that reason their governments might be less efficient in the use of their natural resources and in general resources. And there's a large amount of literature on fiscal federalism, which is the idea that you have division of responsibilities between state, federal, and local governments. And there's this thing called optimal fiscal federalism. So some things are great, should be provided at the national level, like national defense. It's hard to imagine states providing national defense at their own state levels. I guess we had that prior to Civil War, and then the results are very good. So. So you could argue some things should be provided at the national level, like national defense, maybe some, interstates, maybe something like that. So certain things could be provided really well by the national government, but again, you have to watch out for the politicians abusing the system, so you need to watch out for making sure the incentives are well aligned. Some things are well provided at the state level, specifically higher education maybe, what should be provided at the state level as opposed to state or national level. So maybe, I'm not sure the proper role of state government in subsidizing higher education. Maybe there is a role, maybe there is not a good role in it. I think that could be debated among economists all day long, but there should be a division between state and local governments. I think local governments are well suited to provide, primary education or at least be involved in it, maybe not provide it, but be involved in it somehow. If education to a large extent is a public good, which again is debatable. You can never have economists agree on everything 100%. So I might say things that might be controversial in the field, but there's a large amount of literature that looks at what local governments provide well, and I think some of the things that they provide well are perhaps education should be provided at the local level. Maybe some public services should be provided at the local level. Again, things that are bigger, that are kind of national public goods, should be provided at the state or national level. And again, once you shift to the federal level, you get the problem of competition. So clearly, I think the more things you provide at the national or subnational level, the more competition you have, the better things will be in general. Again, I'm making a very generalized, sweeping statement here, but I think that's kind of the rule of thumb.
To me, the big inefficiency in government is, there's a law in economics. It's applied to monetary economics or something, but I think it applies to government really well. Supply creates its own demand, right? If the government's going to get into a business and do stuff, it creates a demand for it. And it gets to be very hard, for example, to stop doing things. I have to say, I spent 4 years as the head of an agency. The thing about that I'm most proud of is we terminated 2 programs. And it's, to my knowledge, it's never been done in 125 years in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because they're constituents. They're people who hate losing the stuff. And it creates all sorts of problems with mission creep. You know, your mission kind of goes away. Agencies then shift to do other things that they weren't really missioned for. I think with agencies, particular agencies, there are real problems because there's a huge amount of self-selection going on. People who go work in particular agencies are excited about the mission. And so they're not objective workers. They're people who believe in politically in what their agency's doing. That creates a problem. And I think one of the things that I hate looking forward to going forward is we're clearly, with the federal government, we've clearly got to really cut back on spending. It's going to have to be done. And so far, too much of what I've seen has been a bailout. By bailing out by Congress, I don't mean a bailout as in saving, but as in making no decision. Let's just make an across-the-board cut on budgets. Well, some places do important stuff. Some places are efficient. They shouldn't be cut. Others should be. And to not make a hard decision about cut this but not this is to me, is people not doing their job. The government across the government isn't across the board bad. On the whole, it's too big, but not everything's too big. And you have to make some decisions about what you want to stop doing. It's just hard to do that. And again, making no decision is a decision, I think.
A couple questions on taxes here. First one, I think everyone can might have some perspective on this, but talking about tax rates, that obviously lower tax rates are better, make states more competitive, but not everyone pays the top tax rate because we have lots of tax credits, tax breaks, incentives, home mortgage deductions, incentives for corporations, film tax credits, and so forth. And so the first part of the question would be, what is a better way to grow the economy? Is it through lower tax rates or through incentives to attract companies to come here? And since I know how you're going to answer that question, the follow-up is how you would answer the objection of well, everybody else does it. Every other state does this, so how do we compete with other states that are offering tax breaks to companies to come here? I'll open that up.
I guess that's a question for me mostly. Clearly, lower tax rates are better for efficiency purposes. There is a relatively well-established law in economics that links the size of the tax rate to the deadweight loss, which is Econ jargon for inefficiency. And so inefficiency grows disproportionately with the tax rate. So every time you double the tax rate, inefficiency quadruples, for example. So that's the importance of keeping tax rates very low and the tax base is very broad. So that's where that idea comes from that well-established law in economics that deadweight loss or inefficiency increases disproportionately fast as tax rates rise. So clearly, it's better to keep tax rates low. That's why, for example, a flat income tax system is preferred over a progressive one for that particular reason. And but again, how do you raise that revenue, right? So we keep tax rates low. We only collect X number of dollars. That's not enough, for example, right? Well, we should raise the question, what is enough, right? When is enough money is enough? If it's free money, federal money clearly is never enough of that from the state point of view. And so first question we should ask is, what is enough, right? I often feel there is a bias, we don't have enough money, let's raise more. Why are we always asking that question? Why only ask the question is, why do we need to raise more? Maybe we spend too much. Maybe we can start with cutting. And I know it's not pleasant. It hurts some people's feelings. It hurts some people's jobs and budgets. But raising taxes is also not free. It also hurts people's jobs and budgets somewhere else in the economy. And I feel like there is a disconnect in people's mind. Cutting spending somehow is cruel and evil. Raising taxes is somehow we have to do that, right? So to me, they're just as bad, right? On both sides, the argument's just as bad. And so again, all right, so if we can't cut spending, we need to raise revenue, and increasing taxes is not one of the options. Broaden the tax base, right? Again, I said it many times, it's better to tax lots of things, but at a very small rate, than to tax one thing at a very high rate. That's incredibly bad for efficiency. It's also, you could argue it's also very unfair. Why do we put the burden on this particular group of people as opposed to, share the burden across many people? And so that's another way to argue about that. And again, there is a limit to how high you can tax something because of competition at the state level, at the local level. So sales taxes, while great, there's only so much you can use them for. There's only so much you can use sales taxes to close your loopholes in the budget.
I'll weigh in here real quickly. I totally agree with everything Pavel just said. In my view, there's sort of two ways states can compete with one another. And I recently looked at all the state of the state addresses from all the governors, and every single one of them talks about interstate competition. Every single one of them says our state is it's a global economy and our state is competing with the other 49. But there's two sort of ways to do it. One is Governor Rick Scott, in his State of the State address, said that the best way to promote Florida's economic growth is to make sure it's the best environment for growth to happen and to just let it happen. Low rates, low tax rates, few regulatory burdens, and then it's a good environment for business. By the way, I wouldn't say Florida is perfect in this, but the way he said it was very perfect in his State of the State address. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania offered the exact opposite, in my view. I'm sure all of you know recently there was this deal to exempt, it was a tax deal, it was to give a big tax credit to a refinery, right? Shell, there we go. So this is the other way to do it, which is we're not going to create a good environment, but we're going to suspend the rules of our environment for a particular firm. And you see this in state economic development offices. That's basically the MO of a state economic development office. It says we're going to suspend the rules for anybody who comes to our state. My colleague, Maurice McTeague, has a way of putting this. He says the best economic development policy is not to need one. The point is you're admitting failure if your whole policy is to suspend the rules of the game in order to attract particular firms. You should have a good set of rules of the game. Low rates, few regulations, come here or start here. That's a big point, by the way, is that these kind of special, these suspensions of the rules favor firms that are able to relocate to a state, but they do nothing for the mom and pop that is small now that might become the next big international corporation. They keep them down. So I would make that argument. Now, as you kind of allude, it's not easy, particularly when you have the everybody else is doing it mentality. And so I actually am in favor of thinking a little bit more creatively about this in ways that maybe states can bind together and form interstate compacts. For example, if you form an interstate agreement that says we will make the agreement that whatever tax rate applies in this state applies to everyone at the same rate, in exchange for having every other state do the same thing. Now if you choose the tax rate as 0, that's fine. It still leaves the states open to choose what it is, but it's an agreement not to discriminate, not to play favorites within the state borders. In a way, this is actually what national governments have done on a major scale with the WTO. This is one of the only examples where economic freedom has advanced steadily and almost against what economists would think. So in 1930, the top tariff on dutiable imports was 59%. Now it's 5%. Dramatic decreases in tariffs. This is part of the reason why globalization has advanced at such a fast pace and literally millions of people have been lifted out of poverty throughout the world, is because we've had this major lowering of barriers to trade. Well, part of the reason they did it is the WTO says in exchange for the U.S. agreeing not to play favorites with its domestic producers and not to impose high tariffs on importers, every other country agrees to the same. So it's kind of it's a way to sort of bind all the relevant parties. I think there might. I mean, I'm not saying that it would be easy to form an interstate compact, but there is some precedent for this, and if it could happen, I think that would be a really, really positive way. An interstate compact that says we're not going to play favorites. I think that'd be interesting.
And the Shell deal, I think, is such a big example of the government picking winners and losers. It is obvious to, it was talked about throughout budget season. You had legislators on the left saying this is corporate welfare. How dare you give such a tax break? What a great opportunity for us to explain to those who normally would not share our philosophies why we also don't think that government should be picking winners and losers, not just with Shell, not just with oil companies, but across the board. It's a fantastic, although a terrible policy decision, it's a wonderful bridge in explaining, digging deeper into these economic policies and making Pennsylvania a better business environment, to talk about how we agree with them and how we can, but where we disagree is, how, and use that as a bridge to talk about lower taxes and good economic policy and limited government.
There's a reason why economists like broad-based taxes, right? Why they like, look at it, is taxes change behavior, right? A broad base, for example, means people their behavior isn't affected by it. I'm a big fan of entirely trying to separate economic policy and tax policy. Taxes are a way of funding the government, not manipulating the economy, at least to me. There are a lot of things with our tax system now that creates real problems. Everybody's worried about the savings rate, right? People save enough. Look at our tax system. It absolutely encourages spending. It discourages savings. We're just going through a horrible housing cycle. I love my mortgage tax credit, but we've encouraged the overconsumption of housing through tax breaks, right? There are lots of unintended consequences of taxing and doing tax things differently. Moving to a consumption tax, for example, I think is one of these ways of dealing with savings rate versus consuming. That's one of the things economists like about a broad base. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of trying to use the tax system to manipulate things. I think it's a way of funding the government, but you got to try to make it as neutral and as little impact as possible.
Another question we got was specifically, what are your thoughts on taxing Marcellus Shale activity? And this is in Pennsylvania in the news, the Marcellus Shale gas boom, whether we should impose a severance tax in Pennsylvania that some other states have. They actually tax the gas that's brought out of the ground. So I wondered if open that up for any comments, and I'll jump in and answer it my own way at the end, because I obviously have thoughts on that matter.
Okay, I guess I'll be the sort of unofficial tax expert here, I guess, due to my presentation. It's a good question. I don't have a very strong opinion about this. I just have sort of some caveats, kind of things to watch out for. I'm not sure I have a great idea, but I think I can spot some of the terrible ideas, that we might have. First of all, unusually for myself, I will start with the fairness argument for the severance tax on natural gas or whatever it might be that we decide to tax. Economists differentiate between the legal or statutory tax burden and the economic tax burden, which are not the same. So in the case of severance tax, I'm afraid that the actual tax burden might fall on the consumers of natural gas, which means all of us who consume natural gas in one form or the other, at our homes or elsewhere. So when we try to tax businesses, we often need to realize who we actually tax with those taxes, and usually it means us, people who consume the products, workers who work for these businesses. They're usually the ones who bear the burden, most of the burden of those taxes, even though the official tax burden is on businesses or corporations or whatever that might be. So that's one aspect. We need to keep that in mind, and I think we need to explain it to the people, because this is one issue I hit all the time. It's amazing how many people believe that just because you tax somebody, these are the people who bear the burden. You know, there's so many unintended consequences, and the burden is so sometimes diluted across the entire population that, you know, people often don't realize that point. And so that's one point I constantly struggle with in terms of explaining it to, you know, everybody, beginning from my students to the general public. And so that's one, you know, warning I would give. You know, be careful who you're trying to tax here, because by trying to raise revenue from a severance tax, you might hurt some of the poorest households in the state. In terms of efficiency, the other point is we're kind of blessed that we have this shale, and that it's, you know, mostly under our state, but I believe it's also in West Virginia and maybe some other states. So if you tax too many companies here, where are they going to go? You know, so, you know, watch out as to how much you tax them and how you tax them, because again, we might discourage a lot of economic development in the state by trying to grab too much of that so-called free money, maybe. I don't know. So that's my 2 cents.
Just a couple of comments on that. I mean, going to, first of all, there was an impact fee passed this past legislative session. We thought the impact fee, the idea kind of made sense, but the way it was actually imposed was more like a tax, because a fee would be charging companies for the government they use, or charging them for environmental inspection, cleanup, and so forth. But this was a much broader fee that went, you know, basically redistributed money from the gas drillers to other purposes. So it functions somewhat like a small tax. The other question, part of it, I think, goes to Pavel's comments and in his presentation. When you looked at some of the maps, the argument for taxing Marcellus Shale, putting a severance tax, is because other states have severance taxes. And states like Texas, Wyoming have a severance tax, Alaska. As you saw from some of the charts, they have no income tax in those states. Some of them have no corporate income tax. Pennsylvania has a very high corporate income tax. Companies pay the sales tax, income tax, and other things. So if you're looking at state competitiveness, we have a relatively high overall tax burden, and this would just, if you just took a severance tax and added onto that, it would simply grow the size and the cost of government. If you tried to make Pennsylvania more competitive and implement a severance tax on natural gas to lower taxes elsewhere, lower the income tax, then you're trying to keep Pennsylvania competitive. So I think it does need to be looked at in the aspect of our competitiveness overall and the overall tax burden.
And something we always note when we get questions about taxing the Marcellus and the natural gas industry is that our natural gas companies are paying every other tax that every business in Pennsylvania pays. They're already paying those taxes. There are no specific natural gas industry tax loopholes. So, and that has already generated billions and billions of dollars in tax revenue for Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that would be my objection, is at the same time that government shouldn't be trying to hand out privileges to firms, there's no reason that it should be seeking to find particular industries or firms to hand out punishments. I think we should be striving for neutrality.
And I know we're running a little late on time, so I'll have one kind of question I think might wrap things up. It goes to some of the, the president is looking at the overall state of the economy and how we're slow coming out of this recession. And I know economics is the dismal science. So, is this the new norm? Are we burdened with so much debt? Our recovery is going to be slow. We're never going to come out. It is 8% unemployment. Where we're going to be for decades to come is, lower job participation going to be the new norm. High debt, high deficits. Are we stuck where we are, or is there hope? Is there things we can change to be more competitive, to grow our economy, and to get back on the path to prosperity? So I'll test how dismal you really is on this.
Yeah, there's a ton of speculation about is this the new norm and that sort of thing. I know no reason why one should change their long-run view of the economy. There's really no reason to. I don't think this is the new norm. I think we're also constantly surprised by the economy. I think the economy constantly can exceed expectations at times. You know, if I paint a dismal picture about how long it's going to take, records are broken all the time on things. I don't know that it is at all. I don't know that at all. I do think the private sector has a way of sort of surprising you, and productivity has ways of surprising you. I think one of the things that's quietly gone on through this recession, for example, I think there's been a real movement forward in the use of technology and productivity. And I'm really interested to see how we come out of the recession with that. Because I think it may affect some industries in a negative sense, but overall it's going to be a real positive to have this much increased use of technology. So all that's saying, I don't know. I'm not so pessimistic though in the long run, because there's no reason to be pessimistic. We're waiting for growth to occur, and there's no reason to think it won't.
I'm somewhat scared by the fiscal tsunami that is coming up. I think that's going to be the biggest threat to growth, even despite technological progress, which I would certainly hope would happen. I'm praying for this another technology that is going to improve our productivity. Hopefully, it will come along soon to ease the burden of financing future obligations that we have undertaking at the federal and state level. I'm talking about unfunded liabilities, talking about the medical costs that are just going to go through the roof. Social Security, if you think Social Security is a problem, I think Medicare is going to be even a bigger problem. So we're going to have, United States, I'm afraid, is going to turn not just into a giant pension fund, but also a giant hospital that happens to have an army. And I'm paraphrasing Paul Krugman here. So to me, these are the biggest threats. Our future fiscal burdens that we have put on ourselves through some twisted politics that we have, kind of, I think we have robbed our kids of the future in a sense through these fiscal decisions. And I think that's the one thing that might make our long-term growth rather small. We might end up in that picture that you showed, Matt, where we are robbing ourselves of 2-3% growth rates in the future for many decades if we don't solve that fiscal tsunami that is coming up.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the economic freedom literature, and I would kind of take a longer view of this. So prosperity is neither inevitable nor accidental. There are some societies that prosper and there's some that don't, and there's major differences in the types of policies that are pursued in the ones that prosper and the ones that don't. Now, I don't mean short-term policies, stimulus here, tax cuts there, temporary, whatever. I mean big long-term policies. Overall, how burdensome are your tax rates over the long run? Overall, how much are you spending? Overall, how much are you regulating? Those things make a really big difference. And it's very clear to me from the literature that those societies and those places and times that offer their citizens more economic freedom have a much more prosperous and faster growth rates than other societies. I do have some reason actually to be pessimistic, is that our economic freedom in the United States, at least as measured by economists, has been diminishing. And it doesn't start with Obama, it actually starts 2001. So basically, if you look at the course of, I have a blog, neighborhoodeffects.com, and my most recent post includes a graph of this, and you look from 1970 through 2000, basically you see measured economic freedom, the degree of interference in the economy from the government. It's on a steady path up. From 2001 onward, it starts going down as we see things like the prescription drug benefit, as we see things like increased regulations, we see steel tariffs, erosion of rule of law and certain kind of legal precedents. But it's kind of slow and steady, and then 2007 and then 2008 and 2009, it just goes off a cliff. So, I would argue, recently, not so long ago, the Treasury Secretary said, we're not Greece. Well, I guarantee you, there was some functionary in Greece a few years ago who said, we're not Argentina. Everybody thinks that they're immune from this stuff, but you're not over the long run. These things catch up to you. So that makes me a little bit pessimistic. To end on an optimistic note, though, Argentina is like the worst basket case of an economy from the course of the 1900 to 2000, yet they're still the Argentinian today is still better off than an Argentinian in 1900. Why? Because they have a little bit higher per capita GDP, but they also have all these inventions that other countries that may not have originated in Argentina, but they can piggyback off of us. They have penicillin. They have anesthesia, that's really handy. They have access to technologies from Wi-Fi to the internet to cell phones, all of these things. I mean, it's really hard to look at the Western world, or at least the industrialized world from 1800 onward, and not be pretty darn optimistic. I mean, every generation does better than the one before. If we hit if we, because of our lack of economic freedom, hit a growth slowdown, what it means is that the rest of the world is going to leave us behind, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to suddenly be living in the Stone Age.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because of you all in this room. I'm optimistic because of the people in Valley Forge Patriots and Coalition for Advancing Freedom and Delco Patriots and Leadership for Liberty and Americans for Prosperity and Westchester Tea Party, because we're seeing people are waking up and getting engaged in the process and communicating more about this and talking to their legislators and being involved at the local level in politics. And we're seeing, you know, we didn't get to this place overnight. We didn't get here because of one policy or one president. And we're not going to return to prosperity tomorrow or on November 7th. It's going to take time. And but I believe that we have the foundations, we have the blueprint, we have and we have the principles that will take us back to where our founders intended, and in a future that we can be proud of and that we can proudly leave to our children.
Well, do you want to take us out then and close us out?
Yes,
and
I
tell
will
how
take us
people can-
out.
How we can stay, how everyone can stay informed and get more information on this. And
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for coming again, for spending half your Saturday with us. It was great seeing you all, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon and visiting your groups all again soon. You can check out commonwealthfoundation.org. You can call or email me. I know you all have my information. And the Mercatus on our website is mercatus.org. Also a great source of information. Thank you to our speakers and again to the Mercatus Center for joining with us on this event, and just really appreciate all of you spending your Saturday with us. So have safe travels home, and we'll be in touch.